Well, it's great to see you again. We're just having a series of conversations with various folk throughout our church, just exploring different aspects of the life, the ministry, the mission of MIE. And it's great to have Maggie Gaved here with me. Maggie, you oversee, is that too strong a word for it? Oversee kind of our global church brief and portfolio. It sounds very grand. We sort of set this priority to be, a church that's involved with the global church. What actually is that about?
Well, I suppose my role is to, I'd say, coordinate the global, what we call the global church group. So, group of people whose remit is really to encourage the church to take seriously this commitment that we say we have to be the part of the global church, to help people to actually make that real, because it can be quite a sort of vague thing, but actually what does it mean to be part of the global church? I think that's probably would say is our remit.
And what does it mean to be part of the global church? Why is it important for us to have connections elsewhere around the world?
I think the first thing I'd say is that the Christian church is a worldwide church. It always has been. We see right back in when the early church in the book of Acts, how Paul went out to lots of different countries, and immediately the believers in different countries felt very much part of the same body as other people in other countries. We see examples of them helping one group of believers in one country, reaching out and helping people in another. The way the greetings are always sent between different churches. Yeah. And today there are believers all over the world. So it's a reality that we are a global church, and we are called to be, we are told that we're part of the same body. We're all equal sons and heirs and children of God with Christ. Mm-hmm. So I think from that point of view, it's a reality. What that then means, how we work that out, is perhaps a different question.
Okay. I mean, one of the things that, like, historically, maybe the church in the West sort of saw itself as, superior. You were talking there about how we're all equal, but the church in the West would have seen itself as the resourcing church, the sending church. That's all breaking down now in quite graphic ways, isn't it? I mean, do you want to just talk us through a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's quite interesting that, of course, the church started in the West.
Yeah.
The Christian church started in the Middle East, and a lot of the early Christians and a lot of the church fathers were actually in North Africa rather than in Europe. But it's true that since perhaps, I don't know, the 9th, 10th century, Europe became the sort of center of Christianity, and that's where a lot of the missionaries went out, of course, from Europe and from North America in the 19th century. Mm-hmm. But these days there are many more Christians in what we now think of as the global South than there are in the West, in Europe, in the States. So a lot of people talk about how the center of the church, the center of Christianity, has shifted. It is no longer in the West. Some people use the expression that it was from the West to the rest, that the missionaries went from the West to the rest of the world. But these days, there are Christians moving from all over the world to all over the world. God is using people from probably every country in the world to go to other countries and to share the gospel and to help to build up the church.
Yeah. So it's much more of a sort of sense of mutuality now. There are ways in which, say a church like MIE can support the church elsewhere in the world. But I mean, one of the things that you've been really kind of pressing on us is this sense of being prepared to be supported by and humble enough to learn from some of the organizations and churches that maybe we've thought of ourselves as supporting. I mean, what are the kinds of things that you would be keen for us to learn from the church elsewhere in the world?
I think many places in the world, the church has very different challenges to the challenges that we have here in the West.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes they can be physical challenges. There can be financial challenges, and I think there's still a role for the church in the West to be helping with that, because we've been blessed with more financial resources often. But I think perhaps because of some of the challenges that the church has had and the communities, the sort of communities they're in, they've learned different things about God. I think there's many churches who have learned to have much more dependence on God than we have. I think in the West, certainly until the recent events, we've tended to think of ourselves as being very self-sufficient. Yeah. We have our resources, we can do what we need to do ourselves, and we don't need to be dependent on other people. Whereas I think the church in other parts of the world, in the global South, people would typically come from backgrounds where they do need to depend on other people. Mm-hmm. They don't have the resources to survive on their own. They also often, there's culturally a much stronger sense of community. Right. Relationship being much more central perhaps to life. And that's something that, having spent a number of years living in West Africa, that I certainly experienced, that the sense of community in the church and between Christians of different churches was in many ways a lot stronger than it is in the West. It was very much a feeling of we are all part of one body. I mean, an example of that would just be things like if someone from within the evangelical community was getting married, it was announced in all the churches. It was because it was seen as part of the family. Right. So, and yeah, perhaps much more that sort of sense that we are all much more united.
Yeah. I've always been struck in the book of Acts that Christians talk about the churches, these are our people. Yeah, and it's almost like their primary identity sort of becomes mixed up with the church. This is who we come from. This is our people, and I think you're right. I think in the West we've got such an individualistic outlook. Even in the church, where we try really hard to kind of cultivate fellowship and a corporate sense of identity, we're still really programmed to think of ourselves individualistically. And you're saying one of the things we can learn from the church elsewhere is to think of ourselves in a very different kind of way.
Yes, I think feeling much more, as being a community, a family, than perhaps we have the tendency to do.
And I've heard you talk as well about how relationships are more important elsewhere in the world than getting things done. People are more people focused rather than task oriented. Yeah.
I mean, I think it's which obviously can have its own, there's always negatives in everything, pros and cons. But I think if you meet, even if you're on your way if you meet someone on the way, if you're on your way somewhere, it's very important to stop and to greet and to not rush straight into what you're going to want to say. I always remember when we were living in West Africa, and I was at the office, and I just arrived, and one of my Senegalese colleagues came over to me and immediately started to tell me some problem that was happening, and she wanted my input on. And I was very amused because this was so culturally inappropriate for her to immediately launch into the issue, that I just sort of stopped her and said, "Good morning, How are you? How's your family?" At which point she was very embarrassed because she realized the sort of working with so many Westerners had rubbed off on her.
Oh no.
And that she'd
oh man.
So, but that, and I think that idea of, often we do see in the Bible the idea of the right time to do things. We've been reading recently in John about how Jesus talks about it not being his time, or it's not the right time. Yeah. And I think that idea of the right time as opposed to what time it is on your watch, is also something that we can sometimes learn, I think, from from our brothers and sisters elsewhere, that sometimes it's much more important to stop and to talk to someone or to pray with someone than it is to get to that next appointment that we have in our diaries and on our watches.
Yeah. A really practical sort of issues of discipleship and fellowship and things, isn't it? And I suppose there's the fact that too that the church elsewhere in the world is by and large growing much faster than it is in the UK, and there's stuff we've got to learn there in terms of boldness and courage and faithfulness and evangelism and discipleship and stuff.
Yes, I think so. And I think also perhaps one of the things we can also learn is the importance of discipleship. I think that's something that I've seen in other countries where the church is growing, and perhaps also where it's been more difficult historically for people to become Christians, that it's perhaps taken more seriously than we sometimes have the tendency to in the West, and that when people do become Christians, often they're going against what their family want, and that's the importance of people being really grounded in their faith, and the church being very proactive in making sure that people are grounded in their faith, that they have a really good understanding of the Bible, knowledge of the Bible, that they're mentored by other people. I know that's something you've talked about, that you've seen in other parts of the world as well. And I think that's something that we can learn from as well.
I mean, this is all very grand and high level stuff. I mean, how does this work out in terms of, if you like, the mechanics of what we do as a church here in Ipswich? I mean, how do we actually connect in real terms with our brothers and sisters in Christ in other countries?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's where it's important that we can build up links with specific individuals and organizations, because the world's a big place. Yes, we could pray for every Christian in every country in the world, but that would take a very long time and we wouldn't know much about them by the end of that. So I think that's where it can really help for us to have links with specific people working in different countries, in different ministries, to be able to build up a relationship, to hear about what God is doing in specific situations. So that's why we do have links with a number of people and organizations that we try and focus on. And as a group, that's one of the things we try to do, is to bring information to keep people aware of what's happening in different countries. So, for example, we support a theological training college in Tanzania, in East Africa. We support people working with the poor and marginalized in Nepal. We support someone working in Birmingham in the inner city schools. So we have quite a range of people, organizations. Some of them are British, some of them are not. So I think being able to hear, get news, but I think what's particularly helpful is when we're able to have people actually visit and speak. People can actually build relationships, ask questions. When we can see videos, see what's happening in different parts of the world, I think that's where it just becomes much more real to us, and that's when we can see what God is doing in different parts of the world. And then the prayer can be, and I think one important thing is that the prayer support at least can be both ways. You said earlier about, no longer being a sort of one-way street. And I think prayer in a lot of ways is perhaps the simplest in some ways that we can do that as we commit to pray for our mission partners and link organizations, we can also share prayer requests with them. And that's something that they're very keen to pray for us too. And then, as we said before, I think that in thinking of the things that we can learn, often prayer is something that in other parts of the world does seem to be stronger. And so I think if we can share our needs for prayer with our brothers and sisters in other countries, that's a huge resource for us. And knowing that people are praying for us, and that too can help to build that sense of mutual dependency on each other, that we can't do it on our own. We need their prayers too.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, in terms of, again, just the really specifics of how that works out, a lot of that we focus just maybe three Sundays a year. We have a global church Sunday, and we try to really give this stuff a bit of profile in those particular services.
Yeah, that's right. On those sort of 3 Sundays, we try to get have someone come, either who's one of our mission partners or representative organization, or from another organization as well, but that it's an opportunity, a Sunday where we really focus on what God is doing somewhere outside Ipswich.
Yeah.
Or even just the other side of Ipswich, but outside our parish, that we're looking at what God is doing elsewhere. We're hearing sort of firsthand about things. It's opportunity to pray for those things as well. But then, as well as those 3 Sundays, what we've also been trying to do is to just get quick updates from people when people have travelled to other parts of the world, when they've visited mission partners, when we have people here who've gone out to other countries. Just the opportunity to just have a quick interview and update, I think is another practical way of just keeping that focus in our church.
Yeah, cool. I think it's probably important to say we do actually give, and we financially support a number of organizations and ministries that are functioning elsewhere in the world, and that's really quite deliberate and intentional. And it's as a PCC, we are, like, every year we're looking to kind of increase the percentage of our budget that we are actually giving. So it's it sounds awful saying it's not just prayer. But it's not just prayer. There's a whole spectrum of dynamics in our relationships and support, and I mean, I think it's really exciting, the seriousness with which at that level we are wanting to be involved with and connected with the cause of the gospel elsewhere in the world. I mean, looking forward, Maggie, I mean, the global church group, have they got sort of aspirations for global domination? Is that, I mean, that's probably singularly inappropriate, isn't it? But but how might in the future we be looking to develop this aspect of our life as a church?
Well, it's a couple of things that we've talked about, maybe 3 things, to particularly in this wanting to perhaps increase our knowledge of and increase how we can learn from others, that we've thrown around and talked about. One of them is that we'd hope to have a group of people actually go out and visit some of our mission partners. That was planned for last year, but of course with the pandemic that had to be postponed. We still hope that will be an opportunity for a group of people from the church to go out to another country where we have links, to encourage those who are there, but also opportunity to learn and to see what God is doing there, and to bring back then prayer requests and to take prayer requests too. A second idea that we've talked about is whether we could perhaps have a link between our church and another church. As I said, we've got links with various individuals, with organizations, but we don't have a link with an actual church, a specific body of believers. That's something that we've wondered about, that could then give scope for maybe mutual visits, as well, again, as just praying for each other and learning from each other. Maybe, way of even doing some sort of meetings. We've all learned over this last year how we can have Zoom meetings and have people join in from different places. Maybe in the future, if we had some sort of link like that, we could have a joint Bible study group, or
that'd be awesome.
Things like that. Prayer meetings with people from different places in the world. I think we've all seen, there are many different ways we can do things that we've not occurred to us before.
Mm-hmm.
And then the third thing that we've looked at and done some exploring of is whether we could invite someone to come from another part of the world, a Christian, to come here as a missionary, to be involved working in our church, both to be involved in our day-to-day church ministry, but also reaching out and just bringing a different outlook, I suppose, on the world, a different outlook on church, which could also be a way of our church being served, but also that, again, building on that mutual learning, mutual partnership.
Yeah. And in spite of everything that we've said, there is still a place for Christians to be sent out from a church like ours to serve the church elsewhere in the world. That is still, like you were saying, God is sending, calling people from different parts of the world to different parts of the world all over the place. And there is still a scope for, somebody like MIE sending out mission partners who we would then commit to support longer term. Yeah.
Yes, I think so. I mean, I think one of the perhaps amazing ways that God does seem to work is by bringing together people from different cultures to work together. And perhaps just because that's then I suppose, a model of the fact that God is for all cultures and that he does bring us all together into one family. So when people see people from different cultures, different backgrounds working together, that can be a real witness to people and different to non-Christians. But I think also, from different backgrounds, from different educational opportunities, there are different skills. So, I think there are still things that the West people educated, brought up in the West, particular skills, experiences that we can take and we can put to the service of people in other parts of the world. And that is certainly in many countries when, people sometimes have been asked, church leaders, well, does that mean you don't need, people from other countries, you don't want Westerns anymore? And they almost always will say, no, we still need you. Right. We don't want you to come to be in charge and to tell us what to do. But yes, we want you to come and to work alongside us. We recognize the gifts, the experience that you can bring. Mm-hmm. Come and work with us.
Which is exactly the kind of, so I was going to say, that's exactly the kind of attitude we should have to Christians from elsewhere in the world. Yes. We're not asking them to come and be in charge, but we are recognizing that there are experiences, insights into God and his ways that perhaps we need to learn or relearn. And so we want to benefit from that. Yeah. Yeah.
And that, by working in partnership and working across differences and cultures. I mean, we see that just within our own country when, that is often a huge strength when we have people, Christians who come from very different backgrounds, who wouldn't perhaps in other ways of life get on or do things together. When we can come together because we are brothers and sisters in Christ, in spite of our differences, that can also bring huge benefits.
Yeah. Maggie, if people have been listening to this and there was a couple of things that we could ask them to pray about for this area of our life as a church, what would they be?
I think, in current situation during this pandemic, I'd encourage people to pray for Christians throughout the world, really. Some are in countries where, yes, in some ways there's not been quite so, COVID hasn't had such a big impact in terms of death and illness as it has here in our own country. Mm-hmm. But people are struggling with other things, people who live from day to day. There's been different challenges. Churches have had the same challenges of not being able to meet together. When do they meet together? How do they put things in place to be able to meet? And that's not always been so easy. Less internet, harder to keep people separate, less private transport. So to pray for Christians as they seek to continue to, just like us, to meet together. I think also for us as a church, and again, particularly perhaps at this period, that we don't become perhaps insular and just focused on our own problems and our own challenges, big as they are. but that we remember that we are part of this global church, and that we can pray for each other and support each other through it.
Maggie, thanks very much. Really appreciate you giving us a bit of an insight into what's going on. Even in lockdown, this is all still happening. This is all still going on behind the scenes, isn't it? So thank you. And thank you to the Global Church Group for all they do to keep this front and center in our thinking about ourselves as Christians, ourselves as church, and as part of the global church. It's been great. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mark. Thank you for your leadership in making that a priority too.
It's great. It's good.
Thank you. Bye.